The Future of Silicon Valley. It's a larger web series called Tech.NXT that is presented by Tech Mahindra. Tech.NXT is a series where we bring in the leaders from the corporate, venture capital, startups, and academic leadership, essentially to talk about some of the most relevant topics we have around society, business, and technology. With that, coming to this panel on the future of Silicon Valley, I'm absolutely thrilled and excited to present the panelists. We have a stellar panel. So we have Meg Whitman, who doesn't need any introduction, one of the most successful corporate leaders, led companies such as eBay and HP, on the board of Procter & Gamble, chair of Teach for America, one of the leading philanthropists. Meg, thank you so much for joining us today. We have Jim Wunderman. Jim is the president and CEO of Bay Area Council, one of the most respected policy and advocacy organization formed in 1945 that works to shape the future of the Bay Area and keep it as the most innovative, globally competitive, and sustainable region in the world. Since becoming CEO in 2004, Jim has dramatically expanded and deepened the council's reach and influence throughout the region, across the state, and also globally. Thank you so much, Jim, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Harshul Asnani is a global head of enterprise technology business at Tech Mahindra, been in the Valley for more than 20 years. He has incubated and spearheaded multiple businesses across various industries. He's also on the board of Bay Area Council. He's on the advisory board of University of Washington School of Business, and is also the charter member for TIE. Harshul is going to be moderating the panel today. Thank you so much, Harshul, for joining us.
Thank you. So to quickly set the context for the session today, Silicon Valley has prospered and existed as the epicenter of technology innovation for decades and benefited from an alignment of multiple advantages, right? Whether it is the availability of cheap capital, whether it is a strong network of universities, or the unique culture that makes innovation happen here. However, things seem to be changing. In spite of the skyrocketing valuations of the tech companies around us, there are cracks developing as we see businesses, talent exodus happening. And not really many days go by before we hear a new story about some or the other exodus happening. All the tech giants are now making long-term commitments to remote working due to the pandemic, and this could just accelerate a move towards cheaper locations. And to add to the woes, the increasing homelessness, increased cost of living, and housing issues are bringing into focus the overall socio-economic health of the region. And that needs to kind of get balanced with the long-term economic, social, and the environmental sustainability of the region. So we will talk about the potential scenarios that could emerge, the shape of things, and more importantly, what is the need of the hour. So, Meg, if you have any opening thoughts,
Sure.
and
Sure.
what gives you confidence and maybe what gives you a pause about the way things are.
Well, thank you for putting this on, and thanks to Tech Mahindra and you, Harshul. You know, you've been a leader in the Valley for many years, so thank you for getting involved. And I guess I'd make a couple of comments. Jim said, we have to build consensus that there is a problem. There is definitely a problem. And, Jim will show you the data behind that problem, but Silicon Valley is slipping fast. And frankly, California and Silicon Valley have been facing challenges for well over a decade. What has happened is the challenges, I think, have been exacerbated by COVID, but the foundation of challenges have been laid for many years. I think what we have to say, we have to acknowledge the challenge and then say, okay, so what are we actually going to do about this, as opposed to admire the problem? And I think business, the Bay Area Council, and individuals have got to rally together to pick a few things to really work on. I'm a big believer in, could we do 3 things really well as opposed to try to solve every problem? The first is jobs. We cannot have the bleed of jobs out of California and out of the Bay Area that we have. We lose, if a company gets to a certain stage and they're building more data centers, those data centers don't get built in Fresno or Bakersfield, they get built in UT, they get built in Austin or in Michigan or in other places. So how do we make the tax rate, the regulatory environment more friendly for business? So I'd say jobs, I'd say education, K through 12, as well as our University of California system. The gem of California has been bled of many of funds that are the way up for so many Californians. And then I'd say, the homelessness and housing problem is probably the third place I'd go.
You made a point on the Central Valley, Fresno, Modesto area. That I would look at similar to what we have in Midwest, right? In terms of agriculture, and so on and so forth. And I think you did indicate that when you said that companies like, say, Google and Facebook, could they potentially move their data centers to Central Valley? Have companies thought of that yet?
When you're thinking, okay, I want to move employees or facilities outside of the Bay Area, where do I go? Mostly people think of the Midwest or Texas or Idaho or, lower cost locations where maybe power is less expensive, workers are less expensive, there isn't a housing crisis, there's not, there's where people want to live. And I think we would be well suited as a state to make sure that everyone in the state, when you're thinking of expanding your business and you're looking for a low-cost location, that you at least consider the Central Valley.
So Meg, as the board chair for Teach for America, you've seen the education system at close quarters. And we would all agree that the secret sauce, if you will, of the Silicon Valley is really this triangle between strong universities, availability of venture capital, and of course a culture that helps companies bigger to the companies. And then when you and I were speaking earlier, you did talk about this triangle of powerful elements that really makes it like a virtuous cycle, if you will.
Yes.
But unfortunately, one side of that triangle seems to be under stress.
Yes.
And with the funding being reduced in the crown jewels of California, the university system, whether it is UC or the California state, seems to be losing advantage to other, and not just the university system, even the K to 12 education seems to be losing its mojo. So, would you agree? And your thoughts of what?
If we could only fix one challenge, okay, let's say you could only pick one thing to work on, and you could make a small difference there. My view was that education was the thing that you would most want to change, because if every child in California had access to a fantastic education, K through 12, and a great university system, whether that be the UC system or the CSU system, a lot of the other challenges that we have would fall away, in my view. And you're absolutely right that the magic of Silicon Valley, in my humble opinion, is the venture capital community, the universities, everything, our case from Berkeley to Stanford to UC Santa Cruz, et cetera, to, all the others, and the companies that beget other companies. I mean, HP was the grandfather of Silicon Valley, and it would be amazing how many people who founded companies started their career at HP. But the 1/3 of that stool is education. And unless we are allowing the diversity of kids and cultures that make Silicon Valley and make California so special the same chance at education as the more wealthy school districts, this is going to be a big problem for us. And frankly, I think it's a big problem today. And so in California, the quality of your education, K through 12, is more determined by your zip code than any other factor. And that influences your path in life, your opportunities, whether you go to college. And so if you're not reading at grade level in fourth grade and doing math in fourth grade, like the data shows, you just don't ever catch up. And so I think that's why I would pick education as one of the things that this community has to go after.
I would like to invite Jim to talk about how he sees the current challenges and the way forward. From his unique vantage point as he oversees this noble charter at the Bay Area Council to make this region a great place to live and work. I mean, he has some great, powerful slides with a lot of good data points on a range of issues that he'll cover over the next 10 minutes.
Take you through this presentation, which outlines some of the things that I think we're facing and can lead into further conversation about what to do going forward. Take you through this presentation, which outlines some of the things that I think we're facing and can lead into further conversation about what to do going forward. California trails the rest of the country, or maybe leads the country when it comes to our unemployment rate. So it creeped up in December, and with the state shut down, probably even higher in the January-February period. And go forward. The unemployment rate in the Bay Area is not quite as high, on the other hand, as other parts of the state where it's in double digits. Again, compared to the rest of the country, way out of whack. Some of the areas where we've been hit particularly hard, not surprising, leisure and hospitality, but other areas as well have taken hits. But that particular sector has been very, very, very hard hit. It's going to be hard to recover. One concern is the Bay Area actually trails the rest of the state in terms of the percentage of jobs that have been lost that have been recovered, and the state of California trails the rest of the country. So we don't really want to be at the bottom of this curve, and this is where we find ourselves. The right side of the slide, you can see the little hook at the end, which shows the Bay Area trailing California in the U.S., as I just said. But if you look to the left, this is 20 years, you're seeing the dot-com bust, and then the Great Recession. And you can see, some folks say, well, if you lose a lot of jobs, they'll come back. They don't necessarily come back quickly at all. It took us a full decade to get close to recovery from the dot-com bust, where we actually took, the Bay Area and Silicon Valley actually took the rest of the state of California into recession. The rest of California actually grew during jobs during the 2000-2003 period. We lost over 400,000 jobs in the Bay Area, and they took a long time to come back. I took this job in 2004, and you could see we were, very far at the bottom, and we were wondering if and how we could recover those jobs, and it took a very long time. Go ahead. And the big question mark and trigger in all of this is remote work. So that's something that's very different, and I would argue it's the biggest change in the way we exist as a society that's happened in the last century. So and we don't exactly know what the meaning of this is yet, because after all, we're still in the pandemic. People haven't been able to return to offices yet here in California. But when the dust settles on the pandemic, I think it's pretty obvious things will be very, very different. You can see from the slide that Silicon Valley leads the country when it comes to the kind of jobs that can be done remotely. So those numbers that you see for Solano County and Napa County at the bottom, those look a lot more like the rest of the United States. And here, over half the jobs can be done remotely. So if people can have their job and not necessarily have to live here, that's a big concern. We need to want them to live here and make this the place that's not only where they work, but it's their home. And we're finding out from companies that very few, maybe a quarter, are thinking they'll actually go back to having a single primary office where the people work. And an equally distributed amount are going to some form of a hub and spoke system or a fully decentralized system, over a third, where you can live where you want to live and you can have a job with our company. That's a very different setup than what we saw before, and the implications of that are clearly far-reaching. And one of the subjects we need to get into in this conversation is housing, because when we ask, Bay Area Council is a membership organization of about 350 companies from every sector, obviously including technology. And what our business leaders tell us is that when asked, what's the problem, the cost of housing and the availability of housing for many companies is the biggest issue, because their employees are looking to own a home. And they're looking not to live very far from where they work, and we don't provide that opportunity. If you go back in time, back to the 1950s, you could see we used to build a lot of houses in California. We were very good at it, and suddenly we got very bad at it. And in the last 40 years or so, we have not been building housing nearly close to what we project in population growth. And for any region, for any state, that signals a big problem. So this is something we have to get on top of. The governor's talked about it. The legislature talks about it. We need to do more than talk about it. And what we've seen a lot lately is the talk of the exodus of people. And this slide takes us back a few years. This is based on USPS Postal Service data that shows a trend. A couple of years ago, 100,000 more people left California than came. Then the number went up in the following year, and in this last year, it's doubled from the 2 years ago. So if this is a trend that keeps going, we very much do, in fact, are potentially seeing the beginning of an exodus from California. And the study that just came out of the UC, I think it was announced today, basically backs this up and says, people are not coming here. They may not be leaving in huge droves, but nobody, California was historically a place where people came to have a great life and make their fortune, and we're not seeing that now. And we should be very troubled and not ignore this. Go forward, please. In fact, we're actually expecting to see, when the final numbers are in, for the first time in recorded history, we're actually going to lose population in California. Now, when you lose population, you lose a portion of your economy, because the economy is tied actually to people and their consumption, the spending, and their productivity. The fact is, again, to see this many companies announce such important decisions, one after the next and the next, I would call it a trend, and I'd call it a very disturbing trend. And, there are a number of very, very aggressive states where the governors are in touch with our CEOs, encouraging them to move all or portions of their business. And we're not seeing, as Meg pointed out, the reverse, where we're reaching out to companies either in our own state to retain them or in other states to attract them. And I think that has to be part of any strategy going forward. Is California needs to be way more encouraging, supportive, and helpful to businesses, and get ahead of any thought about leaving. Go forward. And you can see here that we actually are losing tech jobs, finance, professional services jobs. We didn't lose as many as were lost in LA or New York or Chicago, but there were some parts of the country, Austin, Boise, Dallas, which are gaining these jobs. This is during the pandemic period. So during this pandemic, we're seeing tech and tech-oriented type jobs move to other places and leave this place. Meg said venture capital is such an important part of our success. I think we all understand that without further discussion of it. And for years, it was predicted that the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, we would lose our share, but it didn't happen until the last period. And in the last year or two, we're actually starting to see a decrease in the percentage of venture capital investment in the Bay Area relative to the rest of the country. Now, at 30%, we're still the highest in the country, by far, of any region, but we liked it a lot better when we were close to 50%, which is where we were, 40, 45, 50% for many years. So is this the beginning of a trend? If it is, and that line keeps dropping, I think that's a very disturbing trend, because the innovation economy is what makes all of this happen for us. And if we start losing our grip on that, it could be very troubling. We need to reverse this trend. So, one of the things that's true about California is, by far, we have the highest personal income tax of any state in the country. We're 13.3% at the highest rate, and only about 1% of Californians pay half the tax in the whole state. So we have by far the most progressive tax system in the country. When folks say that the wealthy should be paying more, the wealthy in California are carrying the state's budget. In fact, that personal income tax pays for about 75% of the state's general fund. 3/4 of the general fund paid for by one tax that's paid for mostly by 1% of the population. And the proposals are constant to raise it again. So this was something that was raised to 13.3% when Jerry Brown was governor and took over with a big deficit that Meg would have had to deal with had she been elected governor. And a lot of folks in the business community went along with it on a temporary basis, but then it was made permanent, and so or long term. So now we have this tax, which makes us really non-competitive with a whole bunch of other states like Texas, like Nevada, which don't have any income tax at all. And when the federal government eliminated the deductibility of the state tax against the federal, that was a material increase in the tax. The same is true on the corporate income tax rate. We're not the highest in the country, but we're near the top. So I think it can be argued, when it comes to taxes on business and the people in business who pay the tax, we're way at the top. And we need to stop this constant set of proposals that come to tax anything that doesn't move, from assets to unrealized capital gains to the personal income tax to corporate taxes, you name it. Somebody wants to tax it to do something. And I think it's the job of our coalition to call a stop to it and make sure that these bills don't make it through the legislature or onto the ballot, or if they come, they're defeated. So over 40% of the tax that's supporting the general fund is actually raised in the Bay Area. So if the Bay Area doesn't do well, as I showed in the earlier slide from the dot-com bust, you can see what happens to the state budget. And we take the rest of the state down if we don't do well. I have a feeling that 42% is a much higher number in the last iteration, where now the state has suddenly in a pandemic has a huge surplus because of IPOs and the stock market. We'll see. As we discussed, we need to focus on business attraction and retention and make that a true part of what the state does as part of its mission. The regulatory hurdles, and we don't have time to go through them all here, but the problems that business face collectively in maintaining the economy, from hiring people to making investments in plants and so forth, from the kind of regulations we put on building, on human resources, on consumer laws. This all needs to really be reviewed. What are we trying to achieve? How are we balance protecting folks versus enabling the economy to go forward? And finally, housing and homelessness. These are issues that are weighing us down deeply, and it's not appropriate that in a state that's this wealthy, we have the largest unsheltered homeless population in the country by far. About 50% of the people who are unsheltered homeless in America are in California. Something needs to be done to address that. I'll close and say, I'm happy to engage in the discussion. I know that's a lot of facts to unpack, but thought, these are the things that are making us believe that we indeed have a problem, and that we need to start thinking as a greater community about how to address them.
No. So thank you so much, Jim. I think you made some amazing points, very concerning points around multitude of issues, particularly around the astounding levels of unemployment, concerning the slower job recovery in the Bay Area and in California as compared to the rest of the country. You talked about the regulatory issues, the taxation rates compared to rest of the states, and the fact that California actually might be losing population for the first time in recorded history. Those were some hard, cold facts. I mean, the way I see this, Jim, and would love your thoughts on this. I see this as more like a socio-economic conundrum looming in front of us, right? This whole troika of high cost of living coupled with homelessness and the unemployment. Do you think this is some kind of a perfect storm that is brewing, or do you think this is another phase, or is this somewhere in between?
Yeah, and when you add the wildfires and the environmental
Yeah.
issues to it, we've been using that term, and it's a little trite, and so we hesitate to say it. But the fact is, we're facing challenges on a number of different fronts, and they're all very difficult, and they all need us to think differently and be willing to, look at solutions that may be politically uncomfortable at times, and I think there's a lot of pressure from different interest groups in California to, push regulations further, to, protect the forests the way they are, to, prioritize certain services that, it may just be too expensive or too inefficient. So I think it takes a whole relook at how we're doing our business, and get everybody behind together the notion that we do in fact have a set of difficult problems, and that we do together have to fix them. And I don't see that happening, and I'd like to see it start to happen. So we feel like we need to push it. But I think the way you've characterized it, Harshul, is very accurate. It's it's an economic social conundrum, the likes of which I don't think that we've seen. We've seen a lot of things in the past. This isn't the first set of problems our state and our country have faced, but I think they're a little bit different. And again, this remote work issue is a wild card, because it allows people to live a different way. And it could cut both ways. On one hand, you could have California companies where the company's not really in California because the people aren't in California anymore, even if they're officially domiciled here. Alternatively, I think the Bay Area and California is a great place to live. So in a remote work world, we could have people coming here who work for companies who are in other parts of the country and in the world and choose to live here because of the advantages. I'd like to see it like that. I'm one of the people who came here 40 years ago because I wanted to be in California. I wanted to be in San Francisco, and that was a trend we wrote a lot of songs about people coming here. There's no songs about people coming to California anymore. We need some new songs. First, we need to take some actions.
And this is to you, Meg, is the way I see it, Silicon Valley as a concept and not just a location. Would the concept of Silicon Valley could get decentralized, because it's also an ethos rather than just a physical location. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. Silicon Valley is not just a place; it's a mindset. It's an ethos. Yeah. And I think, I think some of the work at home move has been very helpful to families and reducing commute times. And you look at the pollution across the state of California; it's way down because people aren't driving as much. However, my long-term worry is, and I don't know people on this call how they feel about it. I think Zoom works very well for information, for communication. I don't think it's quite as effective for networking, for idea generation, for creativity, for problem solving. Think about the ecosystem that lives in Silicon Valley, about companies begetting other companies, about people meeting up with each other and saying, you know what, we should go do something that hasn't been done before. And I worry that without a critical mass of people in the Valley seeing each other at networking events, at dinners, at parties, at whatever, we're going to lose something here. Now, listen, if I'm the governor of Texas, I'm thrilled to death because I think Austin, has a real shot now with UT, with venture, and with so many companies moving out there. So it's good for other parts of the country potentially. I don't think it's good for us. And you saw what Jim said. Think about the percentage of the California state budget that emanates from Silicon Valley. It's extraordinary. I mean, he said 50% of the personal income tax, 50% of the budget of the state of California comes from a very small percentage of the people. In fact, it's about 300,000 people. So think about 10,000 people leaving to someplace else. That is a huge issue for the California state budget and the services that we aspire to provide. So I do think this ethos and this networking we have not played out this hand.
Now, Meg, you've been a big proponent of diversity, and as one of the handful of women CEOs in the Valley, particularly when you came here 20 years ago, how have things changed, if at all? And if you could also talk about your experience at Quibi, where when we were talking a few days ago, you told me that almost 50% of your staff were women and also 50% non-white. And how did you achieve that? And the question also gains more relevance today because I just realized we have International Women's Day coming up in a couple of days from now.
Well, listen, I bet everyone on this call thinks that, building diverse communities in your workplace is absolutely central. And it's probably more central in California because we are such a land of immigrants. The country is, but California is even more so. You go to the engineering teams at virtually every Silicon Valley company, and it's the UN, it's the UN, right? And so it's super important. And so I've been interested in this for a great many years. But when I had a chance to start a brand new company, it's easier because you don't have an existing installed base of employees. So we set out to say, how can we really build a workforce that reflects our target audience? And our target audience was millennials. And that is the most diverse generation in American history. So we worked very hard at it. And there was two ahas for me when I did this. The first is, let's say you're interested in Latino executives or Latina executives. You've got to find a critical mass before and be a great place to work for Latinos so that their networks can then be opened up to the company. The same would be true with African Americans. I suspect the same is true with many other people of color, that when word gets around in the network that XYZ company is great for that cohort, it's all of a sudden you have this flood of resumes and incredibly good people who want to work at your company. So unlocking the network of people of color, I think, is extraordinarily powerful. At least that's what it turned out for us. And then listen, I think, women are making progress here, but I will tell you, it comes all the way back to K through 12 education. Because if we want more women who are interested in STEM, that doesn't start in college. That starts in third grade. And so it brings me all the way back to, creating access to an excellent education for every California child.
Absolutely fascinating discussion. Clearly, the chat is just ringing. Amazing to hear all the data, Jem. Fantastic information. I think many of the time there's a lot of this guy said that person said that. This research information really tells about the kind of dearth or the kind of the deepening problem that we are facing. Meg, absolutely fascinating to hear from you. You bring the investment, the corporate, the philanthropic, and of course, being on the chair of Teach for America, the education aspect of it and the public policy aspect of it. Thank you so much. And Harshul, thank you again for moderating this panel. Really appreciate it. It's fantastic. Can't say more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and stay tuned. We'll have more of these sessions every 8 to 10 weeks. So looking forward to seeing you all in subsequent sessions as well. Thank you again, Meg and Jim.
Thank you, Harshul. Thank you to Tech Mahindra, and thank you, Jim.
Thank you.